hate to be the guy who thought this was a quirky romance and played it on his first date. Oh boy. Audition. It's a classic J-horror or Japanese horror film that came out in 1999. It was directed by the famous Takashi Miike, who's famous for directing such exploitation Japanese films as Imprint, 13 Assassins, and Ichi the Killer. So the story follows our main character Ayama, who lost his wife many years ago and is now being pressured by his son to get out and back into the dating scene. So he goes and talks to his colleague Yoshikawa about wanting to find true love, and he comes up with the ingenious idea of hosting a fake audition for a movie role, where he can see all the details for numerous different women and try to pick out the perfect wife. It's during this said audition that he's entranced by a very reserved woman named Asami. He tricks her into a first date, and it works out because they wind up liking each other. It doesn't take long for Asami to really attach herself to Ayama, and she eventually requests that she be the only one that he loves. There's clues showing that there's some mystery behind her past, and it's not too long afterwards that she disappears on him. And so he begins an investigation to try to find her, which leads him to a lot of twists and turns. And that's all I can really say without spoiling too much, but I will give you a warning that this movie is infamous because of its final scene, which the movie does eventually become grotesque. That's my fair warning to audiences out there. Even famous director Rob Zombie, who's well known for his exploitation horror films, even he thought this was a creepy and disturbing movie. Now, as far as J-horror goes, this is far from the most intense films, but it is still pretty gut-wrenching. And there's even details in the film that are just outright iconic. There's some very unique choices towards the end of the movie that make this film famous. Now, what I love about the film is that it builds with a string of subtlety that transforms into an intense finale. And that in filmmaking, there's this concept called a color wheel, where colors can represent emotions, ideas, etc. And the color wheel is used very effectively throughout this film in a very nuanced way. Like a lot of J-horror, we have a lot of monochrome and sort of mundane muted colors, but where color does show up is used very effectively. Now, one of my issues with the film, though, is that it is very slow-paced, which is not surprising considering most J-horror is like that. But on one hand, it's not even really clear that this is a horror film until about 45 minutes in. The tone of the film is never really appropriately established until about midway through. There's a general rule in filmmaking that you want to establish a tone right at the beginning of the film to let your audiences know what they're in for. For example, if it's horror, you want to give some kind of sign that it's going to be scary later. Like, oh, we're not going to do it yet, but it's going to be scary, just you wait. I mean, you can represent this like either through the title sequence or music, or maybe there's a throwaway line, but usually there's something to let you know stuff is on the way. But this film doesn't do any of that. It does not appropriately set the tone. Thus, the joke I made in the beginning of this review, bad, but with a point. Something else interesting about the film is that a lot of critics theorize that there's a commentary for either or both misogyny and feminism, despite them being complete opposites. On one hand, you do see a female character that goes through a lot of abuse, thus the misogyny, but you also see a female character that takes that power back and gets control, thus the feminism. In my opinion, I feel like neither subject is really appropriate for this film. I feel like the true commentary is the effects of trauma as well as mental illness, because the movie focuses on a character's abuse and how that skews their perception of love and affection. Which is strange, because if you saw Joaquin Phoenix playing a female character in Joker, I mean, suddenly that whole commentary about mental illness would suddenly become a commentary about feminism. Which is odd, because, I mean, on one hand, sure, trauma and abuse can have its different effects on different genders, but at the same time, though, I think there's a universal thing to say that it doesn't matter whether you're male, female, other. Trauma is trauma, and it has its effects on the individual person. And I think that's a more effective commentary here. And then again, you could also say this is probably more of an exploitation film than anything else. You're supposed to have the scary woman because women are supposed to be less likely to do something this psychotic, maybe, so I think that's where the real horror comes from. But if you have to reach out for a commentary, I feel the whole mental illness thing, I think, suits the film a lot better. So guys, if you're ready for a Japanese horror fest, this is probably the perfect film to pop in with you and your buddies and any horror fans of any kind. Or if your first date is as weird as you, maybe they'll enjoy the movie too. Who knows? Audition gets my score of 3.5 stars. So guys, thank you so much for watching. Have you all seen Audition or any of Takashi Miike's other works? Or what else have you been watching lately? Comment below, let me know, and of course, stay tuned if you all want to see more.